to the application of technology to support both delivery and the use of feedback. The literature review has been made available via the UK Higher Education Academy EvidenceNet Wiki, and you can read and comment on our literature review at the URL demonstrated on screen. The main study used qualitative methods and worked with 23 undergraduate students from across the university. There were 14 females and 9 males aged between 18 and 42. We explored their experiences of receiving different forms of feedback with varying degrees of technical intervention, including but not limited to online grade publication, electronic feedback with grades withheld, and criteria-based feedback. Through semi-structured interviews, participants articulated their experiences of feedback. During the interviews, students were encouraged to identify how their feedback was provided, how useful they found the feedback, and what they had done or intended to do with the feedback. This approach provided an insight into the effectiveness of feedback and how students engage with it. As we were aware that some students may not have experienced receiving feedback via the feedback wizard, this section of the interview were accompanied by examples of feedback generated by the feedback wizard to encourage students to think about the benefits and drawbacks of this approach to feedback. Okay, the full literature review and references can be read at the URL which was visible on the previous slide and is also visible at the bottom of this slide as well. It is generally accepted that feedback improves student learning. However, traditional and current practices of feedback are no longer effective. This is mostly as a result of current pressures in the higher education sector resulting in modularisation and therefore the bunching of assessment tasks limiting the scope for assessment practices to feed forward. This has resulted in a negative impact on the student experience of feedback, with students expressing dissatisfaction with the timeliness and usefulness of feedback in their responses to the National Student Survey in the UK. Staff also complain that feedback doesn't work. They claim students fail to act on feedback or are only concerned with their grade. But this is often based on anecdotal evidence from tutors, and therefore several authors call for further research into exactly how students perceive, receive, and respond to feedback. Many authors have suggested that separating feedback comments from the mark is an effective strategy in engaging students in acting upon feedback, as well as focusing on development of reflective skills and linking feedback to personal development planning to encourage student engagement. Feedback grids tailored to the assignment and feedback linked directly to the achievement of learning outcomes help students use learning outcomes and assessment criteria as learning targets. There is a growing body of evidence to suggest that incorporating technology into the feedback process can enhance student engagement with feedback. Earlier literature discusses the benefits of instant feedback delivered at the end of computer-based tests, whereas more recent studies indicate feedback on student work sent electronically is returned privately and students can respond to feedback at a time convenient to them. And the legibility of typed comments is also an effective strategy. The most recent work looks at the use of technology to support the production of feedback, such as the use of electronic marking sheets and the creation of comment banks and software solutions developed to link feedback to learning outcomes and assessment criteria, both in an attempt to speed up the marking process and to encourage student engagement with feedback, as it is claimed that students use assessment criteria as learning targets. I will now start to discuss some of the findings from our project, starting with the online publication of grades and feedback, or the use of the Blackboard Grade Centre to return feedback and grades. Online publication of feedback and grades enables students to access their feedback and grades at a time and place of their choosing. In common with the use of technology to support learning more generally, the students appreciated the flexibility and convenience that this offers. Students mentioned that having feedback published online pushes the feedback to them, removing the burden to actually go and seek out the feedback from tutors. Students discussed the inconvenience of having to collect feedback at a time dictated by the university, and therefore they appreciated the fact that feedback delivered online allows them control over how, when, and where feedback is received, along with students responding to feedback when they are emotionally ready and in privacy. Electronic feedback was perceived to be more thoughtful than handwritten feedback. Students recognised that tutors could easily edit and revise their feedback as they read through assignments, thus presenting a more cohesive and considered response. A large number of students claimed that they were more likely to engage with feedback when it was typed and therefore legible. Students perceived that the ability to publish feedback and grades online enabled staff to return their feedback more quickly, thus keeping the feedback in close proximity to the assessment activity. But while students responded positively to the quick turnaround possible, this did not follow when grades were made available online prior to feedback being made available elsewhere for collection. In these circumstances, students were less likely to read or even collect hard copy feedback. Students valued the perceived permanence of access to their online feedback and were more likely to revisit feedback stored online to support future learning and assessments. Students did, however, still value hard copy feedback, but few had a logical storage system for such feedback and rarely referred back to it after an initial read. Students also valued the ability to monitor their progression and performance and to see how they are achieving on each assignment during rather than following the module. However, some students demonstrated a strategic approach to future assessments by focusing on the number of grades needed and using this to determine the degree of effort. In terms of adaptive release of grades or using the features of the assignment handler building block, generally students understand the educational value of separating the grade from the feedback as a means of encouraging them to read and reflect on their feedback. Students acknowledge the benefits of reflecting on their feedback and recognise that this was important to improve future learning. However, the purpose of reflection and action planning needs to be made explicit in order to prevent students from taking an instrumentalist approach. However, a strong theme emerged in that students felt that they had fulfilled the assessment by completing and submitting their assignment. Writing and reflection was seen as an additional requirement, and in some cases, this need to engage with their feedback was negatively perceived as enforced reflection. Despite this, the study found that students were more likely to engage with the process of reflection when they had been told explicitly that they would be required to reflect on their feedback before receiving their grade and why this would be of value to them. In addition, as we saw with the previous slide, students do like to receive their feedback and grades in close proximity. And we also found that students do produce action plans from their feedback, regardless of method of delivery, but this is a subconscious approach. It was found that assignment handler provides a space to formalise this process.